A very good morning to you on this 5th day of February. If you've reached us, you've joined the channel of the Fifth Connection, a channel on which we are given to talking you through the storyline of the scriptures. And this morning we are in part 2 of Ephesians chapter 6 and verse number 12. Untruth is more salient, but less real. Untruth is more salient, but less real. Have you ever wondered why fake news is so attractive when you spot it, when you see it? It catches your eye. It stands out. It becomes salient. I quoted from an erstwhile leader, Winston Churchill, a while ago. He said, a lie can travel halfway around the world before truth has a chance to put its pants on. How true. Lies seem to get more traction and travel a lot further than the truth does, but it's truth that will always prevail. It will always win out. When the scriptures talks about believers involved in war, in a battle, it's talking about spiritual warfare that this Bible defines very differently than we see today. Today it's about talking to demons, expelling demons, a demon behind every bush. And yet the spiritual warfare is something that is waged in the heavenlies, in the heavenly realm. So maybe spiritual warfare, the way we use the term, is a misnomer. But it has to do with reclaiming the nations. In Genesis 11, God divorced the nations. Bounce over to Deuteronomy 32, you see how he divorced the nations of the world. And lesser gods are placed over these territories, over these nations. And then God picks up one man and starts the plan of calling a nation into being. And he's in the process of reclaiming the nations today. How? Through the gospel. It's the reclaiming of the nations. Preaching the gospel is the death notice on the unseen realm, or to the unseen realm, to the rulers, the authorities, the cosmic powers, and spiritual wickedness in high places. That's why Jesus goes down to the spirits who are imprisoned, and he doesn't give them a second chance at salvation. He announces his victory, because sharing the gospel and winning people, as we call it, to Christ and for Christ is about reclaiming what was lost at the Tower of Babel. Genesis chapter 11. But I want us to focus a little more on verse number 12 and just get the thing right. That spiritual warfare is something that is waged in the realm of all causes. It's called the heavenly places. It's a spiritual thing. And from verse 11, we notice that one of Satan's many schemes, remember, we are called on to stand against the schemes, the wiles of the devil. And I've suggested to you that the schemes of the devil have to do with this funny word that you may not know, egregores, we talk about an act being an egregious act, the act which captivates and paralyzes our minds and our thinking and our way of being. That's an egregore. It is something that eats up our thinking like a zombie. All it does to subsist and exist is eat people's brains. It's like Pac-Man eating up our brains. When COVID hit, there was an egregore that swept over the planet. We all were captivated by a certain way of thinking to respond and conduct our lives according to this non-physical entity that captivated us. From a disease or epidemic point of view, we called it COVID, but there was something that captivated our consciousness. Our collective consciousness was taken over by a non-physical entity. It wasn't physical. It was non-physical. What am I suggesting here? I'm suggesting that an egregore is a mind-made entity. It is made up in our heads, in our minds. And it's not just a mind thing. I think it becomes a lot more than a mind thing. It's part of the methodia, part of the schemes, part of the method and the wiles of the opposer of God, of the devil, of Satan. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against spiritual wickedness in high. Yes, it says in high places. Now you will need to note that because the high places have to do with the unseen realm. It has to do with what the enemy is doing his damnness to do. And I think this word egregore captures it very, very well. Now, an egregore is a combination of ideas and emotions. We are captured by an idea because we don't have ideas, ideas have us. And together with that, there is emotion that mixes in, and that is what captivates our thinking. That is what an egregore is. A mixture, a combo of emotions and ideas. And I'm really of the opinion that the enemy works at that particular level to capture the minds of people, of groups, of societies, of nations, and of civilizations. That's why ideologies are so dangerous. They become egregores within which the forces of hell and darkness operate. Ideology is a dangerous thing even for a Christian. And they exist inside the believing community as they exist outside. An egregore is a mind-made entity that rises out of the collective consciousness. Listen to me now. The collective consciousness of a grouping. That's why we have to be so careful about just believing things which is black ink on white paper and not embodying the truth. What is the truth? Truth is living in fidelity to the flow of reality. There's a lot of stuff here to get your head around, but unless you understand it, you're going to get zapped by ideology. So an egregore, I would suggest, functions more like a brand, B-R-A-N-D. I'm thinking of brand muffins now. We're thinking of a brand and branding. There's a day when kids went berserk for Billabong. Billabong was produced in the backyards of Australia. And if you had a Billabong label, you were wearing a brand. An Adidas label, you're wearing a brand. A Nike label, a brand. A brand functions something like an egregore does. It captures the mind. It's a non-physical entity that eventually shows up as a brand. And oh, how we love brands. Not brandy, brands. A mob functions something of what an egregore is. A gang. You belong to this non-physical entity that draws you together into a physiological grouping. That's why an addiction is so dangerous. An addiction functions something of what an egregore is and what it does. An addiction captures the person's soul. Addicted to wine, addicted to psychedelics, there's a fixation. There's no autopoiesis. What's autopoiesis? There's no room for creating and self-creating. Not that I can create the way God does. I can create out of existent material. So I want you to think of an egregore on a spectrum, as a spectrum. On the one side of the spectrum, you've got the egregore, the brand, the mob, the ideology, this non-physical entity that rises out of a collective consciousness. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got a hyper-agent, hyper-agency. Because when you have an addiction, you lose agency. Something else is controlling you. Or have you not seen a drunk man or a drunk woman before? They are totally overtaken. There's a fixation that is destructive rather than a flow that is creative. A flow that is creative flows toward hyper-agency. A fixation that is destructive flows toward destruction and cessation. Think of a tornado. A tornado, you can't call it a hyper-agent. It's a non-physical entity. But as it creates mechanics and mechanism to move and destroy, it self-destructs eventually. It is what we call anti-catalytic. It perpetuates itself in a destructive way. Ideologies are like that. They perpetuate themselves in destructive ways. I don't care what ideology is, whether it's communism, Islamism, Confucianism, any ism is like that. It captivates the mind. Even democracy has the seeds of its own destruction. It's not perfect. And so that's why an egregore functions something like a headless chicken, a headless zombie. It has all the indications of life, but it's not real. It's a simulacrum of what is real. That's where the enemy functions at its height. The wiles of the devil. I'm suggesting that these are egregores. Now, you would have to think this one through. This one doesn't just fall into your lap and say, oh, yeah, right. Satan is a lot smarter than we are. Oh, we think we're the bee's knees. We think we're hot stuff. The world will die without us. An egregore is filled with what I would call parasitic processes. It has to live on a host, the way an addiction lives on a host or in a host. It needs a host in order to express its captivation. That drug doesn't function in a vacuum. It functions on a human body. But the opposite of that is somebody who is given to hyper agency, high agency to do and to be what God has called them to be. They aren't given to parasitic processes. They are given to agentic processes. Listen to the word agentic, agency. They are given to processes, procedural dispositions and postures, not ideological possession and postures. Because ideology postures in a static way. A procedural disposition postures in a dynamic, creative way. Zombies make up those who are ideologically possessed. Free thinkers and livers, not the organ, the liver, but free thinking people who can think well inside of thinking wells as well as outside of thinking wells, are process driven. They're driven by processes, not propositions. And they can think their way clear through a crisis. Are you clear thinking this morning, or is your brain pretty much just scrambled eggs? Oh, sometime or another, it happens to all of us. Thinking is very scrambled. But if that's the characteristic way I'm living, I'm in trouble. I'm living in ways that are destructive. When egregore can get to me very, very easily and call me out and say, you are useless, hopeless, and helpless. And I'm not just going to kill your kids. I'm going to get you to kill your kids. And to top it all, I'll get you to kill you. I'll influence you like that. That's what an egregore does. Hyper-agency does exactly the opposite. It is autopoietic. It creates out of self. Self is creative. It can create songs. It can sing. It can paint. I should say she can paint. She can sculpt. She can create. Now, there's so much that needs to be said here based upon Ephesians 6 verse 12, because this is where the warfare and the battle is raging. It's raging in the sphere of egregores. Non-physical entities, mind-made entities that take over our being and our existence. That's why if you've listened to one Christian, you've listened to them all. They are dry as a bone. They are dry as dust. And the pagans look at us and think, yeah, right. That's what it's about. I don't want it. It's like the kid who said to the mother, Mom, look there, look there. There's a Christian. The mom said, where? The donkey, Mom, the donkey. Wow. That ain't a good descriptor. Long coffee pot faces. When you look at that face, you think it's going to rain. And of all people, we should have a jump in our step. We should move with excitement. Oh, we get so beat up because we don't understand that the battle is spiritual and we are fighting each other, bashing each other, ripping at each other, but not understanding what inspires that kind of confusion. And to do everything in our power and outside of ourselves to work at relationships, the field of relationality, because that's where the battle expresses itself. It rises in the heavenly places. It bursts itself in the heavenly places because it's spiritual. And it expresses itself in how we respond to our world, to worldlings, and to other believers. There's still so much to say. That's why I've made this part 2 on verse number 12. If you read the Second Temple literature, you will discover there's a lot of talk about how the first century Jew understood the unseen realm, the spirit world, and this battle that rages in the spiritual realm. That's why when you read the literature, you see the names of spirit beings, such as Mastema, the name of a spirit being, and many others, Azazel being another. You can read it for yourself. You can Google that. You can sit on WhatsApp and go to AI and get that kind of stuff if you don't have access to the text. Where are you postured this morning in understanding what the fight is, how it emanates, and how it impacts on us? I trust that this talk would just open the door just a little bit to get you to understand that this is a life and death fight, a fight for the souls of men and women, a fight for the mind. And boy, oh boy, in our own city, in our own country, is a fight for supremacy and captivation of minds. Because if you can change the narrative, if you can capture the story, you will be able to capture minds. How captivated are you this morning? Are you bringing every thought captive to in obedience to Christ? Or are you ideologically captivated by an egregore, a brand, a mob, and ideology? If yes, then you need to tune in again as we continue to talk through what this battle looks like, what the fight is about, and how we fail our way to success as the people of God, because it's about dying and rising. Dying and rising. I trust that you would have a good day as you go with God. So goodbye for now.